About a week ago, I checked out the epic Indian film RRR and asked for some suggestions on other films to check out. Well, I got a ton of different recommendations, so I picked one. I picked K.G.F. Chapter 1 because it was available on Amazon Prime within the United States. So is this something that you should give a watch? In the 1970s, a gangster goes undercover as a slave to assassinate the owner of a notorious gold mine. So I started watching the Hindi version, but there was something odd with the audio, so I just started over. And then I was watching the Kannada, I think that's how you pronounce it, well, that version, and it was a much better viewing experience. Now, this takes place over the course of several years, with the majority of it happening in the late 70s, following our main protagonist named Rocky. And there are also a bunch of moments sprinkled throughout that are flashbacks to when Rocky was a kid, giving us just a ton of insight into what made him into the man that we see in the present. The action and fights are a lot of fun with some really great choreography. There are many times where Rocky takes on multiple groups of people, and it's like he's got the swagger of a rock star combined with the instincts and awareness of a superhero. And this makes some of the fights absolutely crazy, with a bit of wild brutality. I mean, we're talking sledgehammers, crazy shaped axes, and some wicked swords. And while a lot of it is stylized with a ton of slow-mo, it doesn't take away from the savagery of the fights. They were a lot of fun to watch, and there's even a sort of Tony Montana moment that is flashy and dramatic. Now, I enjoyed how the story is told through an interview, building with massive flashbacks. Now, while I wasn't fully on board with the reporter who's hearing the story told to her, it's still an enjoyable way to have the narrative unfold for us. And there's an entertaining element within the TV interview that illustrates just how those listening to the story are becoming so invested that they can't wait to hear more. Now, I wish I was feeling the exact same level of excitement as one of the characters, but it was still enjoyable to watch play out. I think one of the strong points in this is the amount of background and development that we get on Rocky to show how his early life helped to shape his current motivations. And these are interwoven throughout the story to accentuate portions as they become pertinent, so when they're inserted, they feel like natural story beats and they fit well. The coloring of this film is enjoyable, especially how some would become much more desaturated with just a lot of grays. But then there are also a lot of oranges and reds that permeate scenes, so that either creates sometimes a sense of dread and fear, and then other times just bringing a warmth to the sequence. Now, as might be expected, there is a music video portion to this. And it's got ultra quick cuts, tons of flashing lights, but also this showy sensuality. And while it did feel a little out of place, the dancing was fun and the lyrics felt semi-self-aware, giving more story context that built out the narrative. The cinematography is pretty great looking, and while sometimes the editing is choppy and abrupt, there was a really well-executed scene where these people need to smuggle something into this highly secure area, but everything is being searched. The creativity not only of the way that the items are brought in, but also how the film shows how they're assembled, it just adds a ton of urgent excitement. The scene builds with tension, and in this instance, the quick cuts actually accentuate and enhance the sequence rather than detract. Now, sometimes during this story, there's an air surrounding Rocky that makes it feel like he's Kaiser Soze. It's fun to see people panic when they hear of him just being someplace. Even if at first glance, it doesn't appear like Rocky could do any damage to anyone given his predicament. It's the fear that his name and his presence bring that is visible on some of the characters' faces. Now, despite everything that I do enjoy about this, there are several areas that fell short for me. Now, I really enjoyed the action, especially with how it was stylized, but some of the action, it's cut short or it's edited with either cutaways or flashes to black. It's a weird style choice, and it even makes some of the narrative difficult to follow at times. The fade to blacks within a ton of the scenes, it really began to wear on me. And these had a bit of a negative impact because they just felt very trailerish, and it made it much less cinematic. Minor use of these wouldn't have bothered me as much, but they felt like they become more of a crutch than a storytelling technique. Think about when you watch a trailer and the action is ramping up, but because they don't want to show everything, they piece it out and then they use black and the soundtrack to build excitement. And that's what's happening here. But this isn't a trailer, it's a movie. It's almost like the editing is trying to force an emotion or feel on us, but the scenes are already exciting, so we don't need to be manipulated with a technique to arrive at the exact same response we already have. Now, sometimes Rocky as an adult, I think he was hard to sympathize with. He's often brooding, which, it does feel natural with his upbringing and his background, but he's also standoffish, which keeps him at his arm length from us for a lot of the movie. This didn't make me root against him, just made him feel like a stranger or maybe disconnected. Plus, when that was mixed with that rock star persona, it gives this haughty air to him, which wasn't always something that I gravitated towards. Throughout the story, some of the scenes became a bit repetitive, where portions felt like they were replayed a few times throughout the film. Now, maybe they weren't shot for shot repeats, but certain beats felt like they were super similar to other sequences, making those just a bit tired. Probably the biggest downside to this movie is that it truly is the first chapter. The film ends right after one climax, but another is growing, and then the film ends. I mean, while it's not exactly a cliffhanger ending, it's certainly incomplete. Now, many people have recommended me to watch K.G.F. Chapter 2, but as of the date of this recording, it's not available anywhere to watch in the US. Now, I know that it just landed on Amazon Prime this weekend in India, but in the US, it's still not available, even for video on demand. So hopefully soon it will become available here so I can get the conclusion to this story. While I enjoyed the first chapter of K.G.F., it didn't bring me as much enjoyment as it evidently did from everyone that had recommended it to me. Now, this isn't a bad movie by any means, but it just didn't resonate as much. There's a lot to like in this, with the building story reinforced by the flashbacks of Rocky's early life. There's also some very exciting action with awesome choreography. And while there's a ton of slow-mo that's utilized, it does enhance many of the action sequences, creating a very stylized look and execution to it all. Some of the editing choices were less than appealing to me, especially with the constant fades to black in action moments, as well as just many of the quick cuts that led to a more frenetic feeling. And while the adult version of Rocky was sometimes hard to sympathize with, I really enjoyed his Kaiser Soze-esque mystique, which then created this air of fear and dread to those he met who were against him. I'm looking forward to seeing how this story concludes, and really hope that K.G.F. Chapter 2 becomes available in the US very soon. There's no sex or nudity, some profanity, and a ton of violence. I give K.G.F. Chapter 1 3.5 out of 5 couches. So I know many really enjoyed this film. Let me know some of the moments that are your favorites in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.